Karate. I'm Mark Graves from Classics in Color, and I'm very pleased to be able to talk to you today about a tragically neglected genre of literature. We classicists love to talk about things like epic and lyric and history and didactic and all of that good stuff, which I love very much. But what gets a little less screen time is the erotic works. So I'm going to roughly put these into two categories. The fictional, this includes the erotic novel, that's your clearaways, which are essentially the ancient equivalent of your modern romance novel, your harlequin romance, that fun stuff. And then we also have the more didactic stuff. So these are manuals that will walk you through how to seduce the opposite sex or the same sex, as the case may be. And in some cases, they'll even walk you through literally how to have sex. They'll have a list of different positions that you can try. Often pictures are included. And so that is the topic that we're going to be addressing in this video. Part of the reason that these works don't get as much screen time in the modern world is that they didn't get a whole lot of attention in the ancient world either. Similar to how you may know the names of some erotic works or workers, but you probably don't discuss them in your academic or professional writings. In the same way, ancient authors would rarely discuss these works, and if they do bring them up, it's usually just a brief reference and preferably with disdain, of course. And so that means, unfortunately, that a lot of these works didn't survive, and even when they did, we know next to nothing about their authors, but I'm going to do my best in this video to share some things that we do know. Or at least think that we know. I always have to remember to throw that caveat in there, of course, but without further ado, let's bring our first lovely lady on stage. We're going to start off with Pamphile of Epidauros. So as far as we know, she was a woman living in Egypt in the 1st century AD, and she was a well-respected historian. She's one of the first female historians in any culture that we know of, and she is certainly the first Greco-Roman female historian that we know of, and she's just very impressive, very cool. I love her. She was a very prolific author. She wrote all kinds of things. She wrote commentaries, histories, biographies of prominent women, and she wrote essays on a wide variety of topics, including sex. So apparently one of these essays was a detailed instruction manual on sex, and it included a list of positions as well as diagrams. Many of the authors that we know of for these erotic manuals were women, and specifically high-end sex workers or courtesans. In ancient Greece, high-end sex workers were expected to be actually very well educated and to be able to carry on witty conversation about literature, about politics, about science or music. They were often trained in an instrument or two, and so they were just very impressive, hardworking ladies all around. But the fact that they were sex workers does present us some problems, at least as far as the names go. Sex workers in ancient Greece typically took on a professional or a stage name, the same way that actresses in porn or strippers nowadays will typically have some sort of stage name. And they're also very similar in that they have that sort of stereotypical vibe or feel to them. You know what a stripper name sounds like. The names for ancient Greek sex workers also kind of had a vibe or a stereotype to them as well. And all of that means that it's very unlikely that we know the real or the birth names of these women. We usually just have their stage names. And also it's possible that these authors are not actually women. It's possible, we don't know for sure, but it's possible that men were using these very stereotypical charged names as pseudonyms if they wanted to write this type of erotic material. And finally, the other problem is that over the whole span of the Mediterranean and hundreds of years of history, it's possible that different sex workers might use the same name. And so while we might think that 6 different books were all written by the same person, it's possible that all 6 had different authors. And I'm not going to worry about that too much in this video. I'm basically just going to talk as if it's all one person, but just know that it could be more complicated than that. For example, Linus. So we have no idea when she lived. She was associated with the island of Samos, but it's possible that's just because she wrote so much erotic stuff, and Samos was famous for its sex work and its sex workers. So it's possible people just made that assumption. So her name basically means little love, and so it's definitely a courtesan type name, and it was frequently associated with erotic stuff and lust and sexual deviance and all of that fun stuff. And we do not have her complete works, but we do have a couple little fragments. So we have a fragment on seductions, and it says, "Now the seducer must come to the woman untidy and uncombed, so that he does not seem to the woman to be a man who takes much trouble." So she definitely recommends the unkept, too cool look, basically. We have another fragment that has to do with flattery. It goes, "With the intention, while he says that she is equal to a goddess, that she who is ugly is as lovely as Aphrodite, and that she who is older is as Rhea." So it's basically instructing you on, depending on what her weaknesses are, how you should compliment her accordingly. And then we also have a fragment that's very fragmentary that has something to do with kissing. And we also know that she wrote another sex manual with positions, but it was much more ironic, much more tongue-in-cheek. It was basically a parody of the genre. And finally, we're going to take a look at a quote from Martial that I don't think is actually talking about our Linus, but does show you the deviant nature or stereotype that this name had. "Lesbian Linus sodomizes boys, and more cruel than a husband's lust, penetrates 11 girls per diem. She also plays with the harpastum high girt, gets yellow with sand, and with effortless arm rotates weights that would tax an athlete. Muddy from the crumbling wrestling floor, she takes a beating from the blows of an oiled trainer. She does not dine or lie down for dinner before she has vomited 6 pints of neat wine." So she violates gender norms left and right. She's very butch, very masculine, and she also engages in weird sexual acts. She's penetrating boys, and it goes on in the poem to talk about how she loves to perform oral sex on women, which particularly was something that the Romans were very not comfortable with, at least generally speaking. We also have Elephantis, who was a Greek woman from the 1st century BC, who was allegedly a poet and a physician, and who also wrote a manual that went through all of the different sexual positions. And next, we're going to look at a poem from the Priapeia, which is a collection of poems written by unknown authors that are all erotic in nature, and one of these actually references her. Lalage dedicates a votive offering to the god of the erect penis, bringing shameless pictures from the books of Elephantis, and begs him to try and imitate with her the variety of intercourse of the figures in the illustrations. Elephantis' work seems to have perhaps been the most popular of all of the ones we're looking at today, because I actually have 2 more passages that reference her. The first one is about the Roman Emperor Tiberius apparently using her work as well. On retiring to Capri, he, the Emperor Tiberius, devised holy places, quote unquote, as a site for his secret orgies. There, select teams of girls and male prostitutes, inventors of deviant intercourse and dubbed analists, copulated before him in triple unions to excite his flagging passions. Its many bedrooms were furnished with the most salacious paintings and sculptures, as well as with the books of Elephantis, in case any performer should need an illustration of a prescribed position. That passage, of course, is from the biographer Suetonius, who loves to be as scandalous and salacious as he can, so we always have to take him with a bit of a grain of salt when it comes to the Roman emperors, but it's a great story, and it's interesting that he knows who Elephantis is. And last, we're going to take a look at Martial, who gives us a list of a whole bunch of erotic authors, which also includes Elephantis. "You read me some all too well-turned verses about debauchees, Sabellus, such as neither Didymus's girls know of, nor the voluptuous little books of Elephantis. Therein are novel erotic postures, such as only a desperate fornicator would venture, what male prostitutes provide and keep quiet about, in what combinations 5 persons are linked, by what chain are held more than 5, what can go on when the lamp is put out. You pay too high a price for your poetic skill. I did also find 2 male authors. The first is Poximus, who is a writer that I personally don't know very much about, but he was apparently very prolific. He wrote essays on all kinds of different topics. He had one culinary work, which is very interesting, but what interests us for the purposes of this video is his essay entitled the Dodecatechnon, which you might be able to guess means the 12 positions. So it's essentially going through 12 different sex positions in detail. And finally, we have Musetius, which we also don't know very much about, but he gets a shout out in yet another poem from Martial. We love Martial, and this poem I think is actually quite funny. Read Istantius Rufus the ultrapothic little books of Musetius, which vie with the little books of Sybaris pages tinged with prurient wit. But have your girl with you, lest you make lustful hands sing your wedding song and become a husband without a woman. So basically recommending to him that he read this book, but also recommending that he do it with his girlfriend in the vicinity, or else he's gonna end up masturbating way too much. And that is all I have for you today on this topic. How about you let us all know in the comments, which of these do you wish had survived the Library of Alexandria? And thank you so much for watching. Karate.